My name is Linda Moore, and I never imagined that one single word, no, would turn my whole family against me. For years, I thought love meant giving without limits. But I learned that when love becomes duty, it slowly turns into chains. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, showed up at my doorstep with her usual bright smile and a sparkle in her eyes. "Mom, we have amazing news," she said, holding Andrew's hand. "We're having another baby." I froze. Those words should have filled me with joy. Instead, they felt like a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I forced a smile, but inside my heart whispered, "Not again." You see, for 6 long years, I had been more than a grandmother. I was a full-time nanny, the cook, the nurse, the substitute mother to 3 little children who filled my house with both laughter and exhaustion. When Jessica had her first child, I told myself, it's only for a few weeks until she learns. Then weeks became months, and months became years. I had built my life around their cries, their homework, their bedtime stories. Andrew worked long hours at the hospital. And Jessica, well, she always had something important to do. Hair appointments, yoga retreats, weekend trips with friends. Each time she'd say, "You're the best, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you." And I would smile, hiding my tiredness behind polite laughter. But the truth was, I was living 2 lives, one filled with children who loved me and another where my own needs didn't exist. My friends stopped inviting me out because I always had to say, "I can't. I have the kids." My knees ached, my back throbbed, and my savings quietly disappeared on diapers, formula, and preschool fees. Every night I told myself, it's just for now. But now had lasted 6 years. So when Jessica stood in my doorway that morning, her hand on her belly, waiting for me to share her excitement, something inside me finally broke. Not with anger, but with clarity. I took a deep breath and said softly, "Jessica, I'm happy for you, but I can't take care of another baby." She blinked as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "What do you mean, Mom? You've always helped. You love the kids." "I do love them," I replied, "but I can't keep doing this. My body is tired. My savings are gone. I've given everything I can." Her smile vanished. "But they're your grandkids," she said, her voice sharp now. "That's what grandmothers do." I shook my head gently. Grandmothers love. They don't replace the parents. For the first time in 6 years, I didn't open my arms to take the kids. I closed the door. And that single moment, the quiet sound of the latch clicking, was the beginning of the storm I never saw coming. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I knew it was Andrew before I even looked. When I finally answered, his voice came through tense and confused. "Mom, what's going on?" Jessica said. "You refuse to help her with the kids. She's really upset." I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee untouched in front of me. "Andrew," I said quietly, "I didn't refuse to help her. I just said I can't raise another baby." He sighed, the kind of sigh that carries both guilt and denial. "Mom, they're your grandkids. Jessica needs support. You've always been there for us." That word, support, cut through me like glass. Support was bringing a meal, babysitting for an hour, helping in an emergency. What I'd done wasn't support. It was full-time parenthood disguised as family duty. "Andrew," I said, holding my voice steady, "I love those children more than anything, but this isn't fair. I'm exhausted." He didn't answer. He just said, "Jessica's crying. Mom, please don't make this harder." That evening, I tried to rest, but something in my chest felt heavy, uneasy. Around 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood there and, behind them, Jessica. "Mrs. Moore," one of the officers said, "we received a report regarding possible child neglect." I felt my stomach drop. "Neglect?" "Officer, those children live with their parents, not with me." Jessica spoke up, tears streaming down her face. "She's abandoned them emotionally. They're crying for her every day. She raised them since birth, and now she's just done with them." The officer looked uncomfortable, clearly realizing this wasn't a criminal case, but a family drama. I showed them photos and messages, proving that Jessica lived separately and that I had been helping voluntarily. They apologized and left, assuring me I had done nothing wrong. But Jessica stayed on my porch, her face no longer tearful, cold, determined. "You think you can just walk away after everything?" she hissed. "You're going to regret this." And that's when it hit me. She wasn't crying because she'd lost my help. She was angry because she'd lost control. That night, I sat in the dark listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and realized something terrifying. Saying no had made me the enemy in my own family. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end of Jessica's retaliation. It was only the opening act of a war never won, but one I would no longer run from. The following week felt like a siege. Every morning, my phone lit up with messages from Jessica. At first, they were polite. "Mom, can you just take the kids for a few hours? I'm not feeling well." Then they turned desperate. "Mom, the baby's crying nonstop and I can't handle it. Mom, we're out of food. I don't have money for groceries." And finally cruel. "If something happens to the kids, it'll be on you." Each message chipped away at my heart. The guilt was relentless. I had always been the person who showed up, who fixed things. To sit still, to not rush to help, felt unnatural, almost cruel. But I also knew that giving in meant returning to the same cycle of exhaustion and resentment. Then one afternoon, I heard a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, I found my 6-year-old granddaughter, Lily, standing there clutching a piece of paper with crayon marks. "Grandma," she whispered, "Mommy says you don't love us anymore." The words hit me harder than any insult could. I knelt down and pulled her into my arms. "Oh, sweetheart," I said. "There's nothing in this world I love more than you. But sometimes grown-ups need to fix things that kids can't see." She didn't understand, of course. How could she? Jessica had turned my grandchildren into messengers of guilt. The manipulation wasn't just emotional, it was psychological warfare. That night, I sat in bed staring at my phone, dozens of unread messages glowing on the screen. I realized Jessica wasn't just trying to make me feel guilty. She was trying to break me down, to make me surrender the one thing I had just reclaimed, my boundaries. On the third day, she sent the children again, this time with her sister Megan. The woman stood on my porch, arms crossed. "You're unbelievable," she snapped. "What kind of grandmother refuses to help her family?" I looked at her calmly. The kind who's finally learned where help ends and abuse begins. Megan blinked, clearly not expecting that. She muttered something under her breath and stormed off, dragging the kids with her. When the house went quiet again, I sank into the couch, trembling, but strangely proud. For the first time, I hadn't apologized. I hadn't explained myself endlessly. I had simply stood my ground. Still, as night fell, loneliness crept in. The silence of my house, once filled with laughter and noise, now echoed with memories of small hands and bedtime giggles. But beneath the ache was a new, fragile peace. For the first time in years, my life was mine again. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calm. The fear that had gripped me for days began to fade, replaced by something sharper: clarity. Jessica wasn't going to stop. She had built her life on the assumption that I would never say no, that I would keep giving no matter how much it cost me. And for 6 years, I had proved her right. But that ended now. I started with the simplest step: proof. I went to the bank and asked for statements covering the last 6 years. The teller, a kind woman around my age, printed page after page of transactions: groceries, children's clothing, preschool tuition, medical bills, and endless diapers. When she handed me the stack, she glanced at me with quiet sympathy. "You must really love your grandchildren," she said softly. I nodded, my throat tight. "I do. That's why this hurts so much." When I got home, I added everything up. Over $54,000. My entire savings account had become Jessica's personal child care fund. That afternoon, I drove to an electronics store and bought a small digital recorder. From now on, every conversation, every visit, every threat would be recorded. "No more," she said. She meant I was done being defenseless. Later that day, my neighbor Martha stopped by. She had seen the police at my door a week earlier and wanted to check on me. Martha was 65, gentle but tough, with the kind of wisdom that comes from surviving her own storms. When I told her what had been happening, she sighed deeply. "Linda," she said, "you're not alone. My daughter did the same thing to me for years. She used my time, my pension, and my guilt. It's called elder abuse, emotional and financial." Her words hit me like lightning. Elder abuse. I had never thought of it that way. To me, it was just family problems, something private and embarrassing. But now I saw it for what it was, exploitation disguised as love. Martha told me about a small support group she attended every Wednesday at the local community center. "We're just a bunch of grandmothers learning how to say no," she said with a sad smile. "You should come." I did. The following Wednesday, I sat in a circle of women, each with her own version of my story. Different names, same pain. As I listened, something inside me began to heal. For the first time, I didn't feel crazy or selfish for wanting my life back. That night, I made myself a promise. From now on, I would document everything, protect myself, and fight back. Not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Because sometimes the only way to survive love that hurts is to stop letting it control you. 2 weeks later, I sat in a quiet office across from a man named Jonathan Wells, an attorney who specialized in elder rights. He listened carefully as I told him everything from the police visit to the endless text messages and the financial burden I had carried for 6 years. When I finished, he leaned back, folded his hands, and said something that changed everything. "Linda, you have no legal obligation to take care of your grandchildren. What you've described isn't family drama. It's financial and emotional exploitation." I stared at him speechless. For so long, I had believed that saying no made me heartless, ungrateful, even cruel. But now a lawyer was telling me it was my right. Jonathan helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter. It outlined in calm legal terms that I had no duty to provide childcare, that any further harassment or public defamation would be treated as a violation of the law, and that I reserved the right to file for a restraining order if needed. Seeing my truth on paper felt like breathing after years underwater. We sent the letter to Jessica and her attorney. 3 days later, her lawyer called Jonathan, trying to sound intimidating. "My client is concerned about Mrs. Moore's sudden withdrawal of support," he said. Jonathan's response was calm but firm. "Your client's concern doesn't override my client's right to live freely." When Jessica realized that legal threats no longer worked, she switched tactics again. Character assassination. She began posting vague messages on social media, photos of the children with captions like, "When the people you love the most abandon you, remember that God never does." Her friends flooded the comments with sympathy. "You're such a strong mom. Those poor kids. How could anyone leave you in this situation?" Then came the call from my workplace. "Linda, we had an incident today," my supervisor said. "A woman came to the front desk crying, saying you refused to help with her children. She caused quite a scene. I didn't even have to ask who it was. Jessica had brought the kids to my job, hoping to humiliate me publicly. I felt my face burn with shame, but Jonathan's words echoed in my head. You have rights. That night, I wrote everything down in detail, attached the photos, printed the messages, and stored the files in a folder labeled evidence. Something inside me shifted again. For years, Jessica had used my silence as her weapon. But silence was no longer my language. The next time she tried to paint me as a villain, I wouldn't defend myself with excuses or tears. I would defend myself with facts. 2 months after the legal letter was sent, the storm reached its peak. My sister Sharon was hosting a birthday party for her grandson and had invited the entire family. I hesitated at first, knowing Jessica and Andrew would be there. But something inside me whispered that it was time. Time to tell the truth, not in whispers, but in front of everyone who had judged me without knowing what I'd lived through. When I arrived, I could feel the tension immediately. Conversations quieted as I walked in. I could see the disapproval in some of my relatives' eyes. Jessica's stories had done their work. To them, I was the bitter grandmother who had turned her back on her family. Jessica made her entrance a few minutes later, wearing a fitted pink dress that showed off her 5-month pregnancy bump. She was radiant, graceful, and perfectly rehearsed. "Oh, Linda, you made it," she said in her honeyed voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The kids miss you so much. It's been hard doing everything on my own, but love makes you strong, right?" Her little performance earned a few sympathetic nods. I smiled politely, said nothing, and waited. When the time came for Sharon's toast, she clinked her glass and called everyone's attention. After her speech, I stood. Before we cut the cake, I began. "There's something I need to say. It won't be easy, but it's long overdue." A heavy silence fell over the room. Jessica's smile stiffened. "For 6 years," I said, "I've been taking care of Andrew and Jessica's children every single day from morning to night. I've spent $54,000 of my retirement savings doing so. I have every receipt and statement here." I held up a folder of documents. A murmur ran through the room. Jessica tried to interrupt. "Oh, come on, Linda. That's ridiculous." I raised a hand. "Please let me finish. I have recordings of the conversations where Jessica demanded money, texts where she threatened to call the police, and photos of her out with friends while I was paying for her children's food and medicine." Whispers turned into stunned silence. My brother-in-law, Robert, who happened to be a retired doctor, stepped closer, frowning as he looked at the pages in my hands. "This is serious," he said quietly. Jessica's voice broke through, shrill and trembling. "You're lying. You're making me look like a monster." "No, Jessica," I replied softly. "You did that yourself." Then came the most shocking part of the afternoon. Jessica clutched her stomach and gasped. "Oh no, the baby. Something's wrong." She staggered dramatically, collapsing onto the sofa. Panic spread through the room. Andrew ran to her side. "Someone call 911, he shouted. But Robert knelt down and took her pulse, calm and professional. "Jessica," he said after a moment, "your heart rate and blood pressure are normal. You're fine." He stood and looked at her sternly. "You're faking." A collective gasp filled the room. Jessica's eyes darted around, realizing she'd been caught. "Maybe it was just nerves," she muttered weakly. Sharon's voice cut through the air colder than I'd ever heard it. "Jessica, you've humiliated yourself enough. You need to leave." For the first time, Jessica's confidence cracked completely. She stood trembling, her eyes darting to Andrew for help, but he didn't move. His face was pale, stunned, ashamed. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." In that moment, 6 years of pain, silence, and guilt dissolved. The truth had finally spoken for me. I didn't need anger or revenge, just the courage to stand up and tell my story. As Jessica stormed out, still clinging to her last scraps of pride, I looked around the room. My family wasn't whispering anymore. They were listening. In the days following that family gathering, everything changed. The silence that once surrounded me was replaced by understanding. Relatives who had avoided me for months began calling to apologize. "Linda, we're so sorry," Sharon said one evening. "We believed what Jessica told us. We didn't know what you were living through." I forgave them. They hadn't seen the truth until Jessica exposed it herself. But the biggest shift came from Andrew. For years, he had been caught between loyalty to his wife and the blind comfort of denial. After that day, the fog lifted. He started stopping by after work, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. One evening, he looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Mom, I can't believe how much you went through. She made me think you wanted to do it all, that you enjoyed it." I smiled sadly. "She needed you to believe that, son. That's how manipulation works." He nodded, his voice heavy. "She's furious now, says I betrayed her. But I can't defend her anymore. She lied to everyone." A week later, Andrew came to me again, this time with something that made my hands tremble. "Mom," he said quietly, "I found something." He placed a stack of papers on the table. Bank statements, transfers, receipts. "She's had a secret savings account all along. Over $80,000. While you were spending your retirement on our kids, she was saving every cent of her own. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the papers, at the proof of 6 years of deceit, and felt both anger and relief. Anger for all the years I'd lost, relief because finally everything was out in the open. That evening, I called Jonathan Wells, my lawyer. When I explained what Andrew had found, he didn't hesitate. "Linda, this changes everything," he said firmly. "We're not just dealing with manipulation anymore. This is financial elder abuse fraud, plain and simple." We gathered the evidence, bank records, messages, and proof of my expenses. Jonathan filed a formal notice demanding full restitution for the money I'd spent, plus damages for emotional and financial abuse. Within 2 weeks, Jessica's lawyer responded. They wanted to settle. In the meeting that followed, Jessica sat across from me, her eyes red but defiant. "I never stole from you," she said through clenched teeth. "You gave that money because you wanted to." Jonathan leaned forward. "Allowing someone to drain their savings while you hide your own is not generosity, it's deception." By the end of that meeting, Jessica agreed to repay every dollar, $54,600 plus interest. For the first time, I saw her realize that actions have consequences. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. Quiet, dignified, overdue justice. 6 months later, when the final payment arrived, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the check for a long time. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the acknowledgement. Every sleepless night, every tear, every sacrifice finally meant something. It was proof that I hadn't imagined the abuse, that my boundaries were valid, and that standing up for myself had been the right thing to do. Andrew had filed for divorce not long after the settlement. "Mom," he told me quietly, "I can't stay married to someone who used my mother like that." It broke his heart, but it also freed him. The children stayed with him most of the time now. And when they visited me, it wasn't because I was expected to raise them. It was because they wanted to. We baked cookies, played board games, and watched old cartoons together. When they grew tired or cranky, I simply kissed them goodbye and sent them home to their father. It was how it should have been all along. Jessica, meanwhile, faded from our lives. The family no longer defended her. Her friends stopped commenting on her self-pitying posts, and her perfect image cracked beyond repair. She was left to care for her new baby alone, finally facing the reality of motherhood she had avoided for so long. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. Justice had been served, and compassion had replaced anger. My neighbor Martha and I continued attending our Wednesday meetings. What began as 5 women had grown into more than 20. Each had a story like mine. A grandmother, a mother, a retired woman who had given too much for too long. Together, we built a network of strength, reminding one another that love without limits isn't love at all. It's self-erasure. A year after the ordeal, I began speaking at local community centers about elder rights. At first, my voice trembled as I stood before strangers, telling them how I'd spent 6 years raising someone else's children.